Well, hey, what's up, everybody? Pastor Matt here. Thanks for checking into my YouTube channel. If you're not aware, I'm the pastor of Gospel Fellowship PCA just north of Pittsburgh. So if you're looking for a Reformed church and you're a few stones throws away from the Steel City, come check us out, Gospel Fellowship PCA. So I preached a couple of weeks ago about Jesus warning the disciples regarding the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. You can watch that video. It's on the Gospel Fellowship Presbyterian Church channel. But I got a great question about the spirit of Phariseeism from one of the viewers. And the viewer's question was in relationship to the gift of discernment. She simply asks, I'm going to paraphrase here a little bit, how do I know if I have the leaven of the Pharisees if I'm the kind of person that tends to have a very discerning mind when it comes to theological correctness, doctrinal correctness, orthodoxy, orthopraxy? I want to be right because being right is being biblical. How do I know if that's not the leaven of the Pharisees when all the while I thought I was just trying to be theologically accurate? And especially the question pertained to just the multiplicity of errors, heresy, false teaching, inaccurate teaching, sloppy teaching in our day. That's not only here, but around the world as well. So great question. And I did want to address this because I think this is something that I too have been tempted with. In fact, it might even be considered a critique to the Reformed movement in general, that being a confessional movement, we so emphasize doctrinal correctness and precision in our theology that perhaps we can from time to time slide into the error of the leaven of the Pharisees, maybe more so than any other Christian theological tradition. I do think Presbyterians and Reformed people in general can tend towards maybe a little bit of perfectionism in their theology. So here's what I said to the question, and I think this is helpful, at least I hope it's helpful. Of course, we want to be as right as possible doctrinally. To be right or to be biblical, to be faithful is a good thing. And so obviously that's a perceived good that all of us, regardless of our theological tradition, should strive towards. If you're not striving towards doctrinal purity, biblical faithfulness, then quite honestly, there's something wrong with you as a Christian. That would be a major fault in your walk with Christ, to not care about biblical fidelity in the things that we believe. So let's imagine, if you will, that the screen of your computer, there's a line, there's a continuum, and on the right, I think this is your right, hope it's your right, it's my left, but for the sake of illustration here, is biblical faithfulness, and on the other side of the screen here is infidelity, heresy, error, heterodoxy, etc. Obviously, and I think this is pretty clear, we want to be moving in the direction of biblical faithfulness all the time, which is why we study our Bibles, which is why, in my opinion, we do need the creeds and the confessions, because we need the help of Christians throughout history to correct us, because honestly, every generation has what we might call generational blind spots. There are things that we can't see in ourselves, and we need other generations of Christians to help to correct us. Just as we see slavery as a great error, so there were generations that did not perceive that. It was a blind spot for them, which is why they call them blind, because you can't see them. So we need the creeds and the confessions to help us stay moored to the faithful Orthodox tradition of basic, or what C.S. Lewis calls mere Christianity. So obviously we want to be steering towards fidelity to the right as much as possible. But here's the problem. It's more complex than that when it comes to the leaven of the Pharisees, because the Pharisees legitimately thought that they were doing that too. So how do we know that we don't have that leaven? Well, here's the answer. Because there's not just one axis going from correctness to error, but there's actually another axis as well. If this is the x-axis of faithfulness, there's also the y-axis of pride and humility. So rather than just two directions, there's actually four quadrants we need to think about. You can be completely correct and be the most prideful jerk in the world, which is where the leaven of the Pharisees could come in, because honestly, the Pharisees were more accurate than the Sadducees in their doctrine, because the Sadducees denied angels, demons, and the resurrection and things like this. The Pharisees affirmed these things. but they were inordinately proud of themselves, which is why Jesus' parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee is so important in Luke chapter 18, because they trusted in themselves and looked down on others. So you could be doctrinally correct and yet be the most prideful person in the world, okay? You could also be prideful and be wrong, which would be even worse, okay? Because then you're wrong in both categories. You could be wrong and very meek and humble about it, which would be more gracious. But here's the direction we want to be moving: to the right and down. We want to be moving towards biblical faithfulness, orthodoxy, correctness in our theology, but also moving downward in terms of our humility, our lack of pride, cutting off pride at the knees, as it were, so that we have humility, graciousness, and meekness in combination with our theological precision and correctness. I've had a few professors or friends in my life that I think have embodied that well. One would be John Frame, who has had his controversies in his day, of course. But if you meet the person, what a gracious individual. And I think that comes across in his writings all the time. If you read his systematic theology, for instance, he'll say things like, there's a good case for A, there's a good case for B. Personally, I believe B. And here are the reasons why, rather than just attack people who disagree. So Frame, to me, has evidenced a great amount of graciousness and meekness in his writings. Another one would be Professor Glodo, both from RTS Orlando. Frame, way more famous than Glodo, but Glodo would be known most on campus as the pastor of the students who really cares about people very deeply. Doesn't have necessarily any major works that you could point to, but his work is his lifelong of teaching students faithfully in the classroom. Just a gracious, humble, winsome, very loving and kind individual. And I often compare myself to those two guys when it comes to doctrinal precision, which of course is a good thing, that's a virtue, but also meekness, graciousness, and humility, which is another good thing. So I think the answer to the question related to discernments versus Phariseeism is that there's actually two axes. There's the rightness or error axis, and then there's the pride versus the humility axis. And both of those are absolutely important and critical to avoiding the leaven of the Pharisees. All right, thanks for checking into this video. Lots of other stuff on here. Love for you to go subscribe to the Gospel Fellowship Presbyterian Church channel. You can see that sermon and others. Hey, subscribe here too if you want. Gospel Fellowship, just north of Pittsburgh. Pastor Matt, thanks for checking in. Love you lots. Talk to you later.